Hi, in this presentation, I'm going to introduce you to Geert Hofstede and his cultural dimensions. First, a few words about Geert Hofstede, and you can see him on the right. He was a Dutch researcher, and he conducted a comprehensive study of how values predominantly in the workplace are influenced by culture. The bulk of his research he did between 1967 and 1973. And at that time, he worked as a psychologist for IBM. He worked for Personal, and he was able to research people in different countries. Most of these countries were European countries, but also the US and some Middle Eastern countries. He was able to collect data from about 100,000 individuals from 72 countries. From this data, he developed a model that allows to differentiate cultures and also compare them. In this presentation, I'm going to use the terms culture, society, and country interchangeably, although, of course, I'm very much aware they don't mean the same thing. So Hofstede research, among others, highlights the importance of knowing the cultures of your coworkers. And when you know the culture of your coworkers, it allows you to understand cross-cultural tensions and hopefully avoid them and avoid or manage misunderstandings. And we know that workplaces are becoming increasingly multinational. Hofstede's model also allows comparison of organizations. Let's first look at the definition of culture, how Geert Hofstede defines culture. So he defines culture as the collective mental programming of the human mind, which distinguishes one group of people from another. And also he says in one of his interviews that culture is the glue that keeps societies together. And the culture are these unwritten rules of the social game. And people or organizations acquire the culture through programming. Geert Hofstede died recently in 2020. Let's look at his cultural dimensions. Currently there are 6, but first he developed 4, and also they're known as indexes. And these 4 are power distance, individualism, masculinity, and uncertainty avoidance. And then when more data was collected, more data was available to him, and some of this data came, for instance, from China, he decided to add 2 additional dimensions, and they are dimension number 5, long-term orientation, also sometimes called pragmatism, and indulgence. And in his words, these dimensions are the way to unpackage the holistic concept of culture. How do we apply these dimensions to compare countries? Here you see how. We have these graphs, and I decided to use Poland, Russia, Sweden, and the United States for my comparison. So you can compare countries and see how they ranked on these different dimensions. We'll come back to this, but we first need to learn a little bit what these dimensions mean. So the very first dimension which he came up with is power distance. And in one of his latest interviews, he defines it as the emotional distance between the person at the top and the person below. So it could be defined as the extent to which the less powerful members of societies accept and expect that the power is distributed unequally. So it focuses on the degree of equality or inequality between people in the society. And it could be high, or could be moderate, could be low. So this kind of statements, when people may make, and they're fine with these statements, wealth and power go hand in hand. Or culture of an organization or company where employees are afraid of disagreeing with their manager. That would be indication of this power distance being high. A low power distance, the opposite to high, indicates that the society de-emphasizes the differences between citizens' power and wealth. And the next one is individualism, and its opposite is collectivism. It focuses on the degree that the society reinforces individual or collective achievement and interpersonal relationships. When the country or the society has a high individualism rankings, means that that individual rights are of prime importance within the society, and these individuals in the societies tend to form a larger number of loser relationships, and they're expected, or they feel that they're expected basically to take care of themselves and their immediate families only, not of like larger groups of people. So this mentality could be seen, for instance, in the saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And the low individualism ranking is characteristic for societies which have more of the collectivist nature with close ties between individuals. And these cultures reinforce extended families and collectives, where everyone takes responsibility for fellow members of their group. You can pause this presentation and read more about this dimension. The next dimension is masculinity, and its opposition is femininity. It is the degree to which the society reinforces or does not reinforce the traditional masculine work role model of male achievements, control, and power. It is based on the understanding that in different societies, different genders acquire different mental programming. And high masculinity ranking means that the society or the country adheres to the traditionally defined gender roles. In these cultures, males are supposed to be tough and practical, while women are supposed to be gentle and concerned with quality of life. Males dominate a significant portion of the society and power structure, with females being controlled by male domination. In this slide, you see more detailed comparison between feminine and masculine. I would like you to notice sympathy for weak, sympathy for strong. I would like you to look at work to live and live to work and think what it could mean. Work to live would be you're working, you make money, and you enjoy life, versus live to work, your whole life is work. Your whole identity comes from work. The last one is resolution of conflicts by compromise and negotiation versus resolution of conflicts by fighting them out. And you have some examples of countries which are classified as either feminine or masculine. The next dimension is uncertainty avoidance. And it focuses on the level of tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity within the society. We will agree that there is always a certain degree of ambiguity in our life, and it has to do with how the society handles this ambiguity and unstructured situations. High uncertainty avoidance ranking means that the country has a low tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. So it means that it tends to create a lot of rules, regulations, controls in order to reduce this amount of uncertainty, as uncertainty makes people very uncomfortable. These four were original 4 dimensions. This is dimension number 5, as I said, introduced later when Hofstede became familiar more with China and started himself research China and Asia more. This 5th dimension is called long-term orientation, or sometimes pragmatism. If this ranking is high, it indicates that the country prescribes the values of long-term commitments. So not immediate gratification, but postponed gratification. So it supports strong work ethic, encourages thrift. A low long-term orientation ranking indicates that the country or the society culture doesn't do that, does the opposite. It's more focused on quick results, doesn't emphasize saving for the future, for instance. Also is more interested in instant gratification. And indulgence. Indulgence and its opposite is restraint. So this dimension is defined as the extent to which people try to control their desires and impulses based on the way they were raised. So relatively weak control is called indulgence, and relatively strong control is called restraint. So now we know what these dimensions are about. So let's see the comparison of Poland with Russia, Sweden, and the US. Why I chose Poland and the US is pretty obvious. Why did I choose Russia and Sweden? It's a good question. Russia, because it's also a post-communist state, and Sweden, because it's one of these countries which is almost always ranked very high on standard of living and on a very good safety social net for country citizens. First dimension is power distance. We see how it's really high in Russia, the highest. It's pretty high in Poland too, meaning that people really feel and accept the correlation between wealth and power. The lowest it is in Sweden. Individualism, here the US ranks the highest, and second one is Sweden. The lowest is Russia, and we can see this ranking as, to a certain degree, result of the state being communist for a long time, when collective is very much valued and more valued than individual. Masculinity, interestingly here, and again, this dimension is about traditionally understood gender roles, is lowest in Sweden. And if we look at this country, we see that this country really thrives for parity in government, for instance, to have equal number of men and women in parliament. Scandinavian countries quite often have women in a position of power, much more often than countries like Poland, the US, or Russia. And interestingly, this index is similar in Poland and the US. For both countries, achievement and live to work idea will be important. Uncertainty avoidance is the next dimension. And we have Poland and Russia having very similar rankings, very high rankings, meaning that they feel very uncomfortable with uncertainty. Why? It's a good question, partially due to the communist past and that market economy still is pretty new thing. If we think about the United States and if we think about personal memories or generational memories, for instance, we all remember after 2008, the prices of houses went down significantly, but we already know they went up. So this kind of knowledge help us not to feel so uncomfortable with uncertainty. Uncertainty is inevitable. We don't really know what future will bring. Long-term orientation, the highest in Russia, interestingly, the lowest in the United States. So we're talking about a quick short-term gratification versus working long-term and delay gratification, and but still having this an eye on the future, on these results, which will happen not instantly, but in the future. Poland here is also pretty low, together with the United States, as I said. And indulgence. So here the ratings, the highest is in Sweden, and the second one is the United States. The lowest is in Russia, and pretty low is Poland, meaning that people feel that it's not okay to allow themselves to enjoy certain things in life. They feel quite constrained. They think about themselves in terms of duty, not freedom to do things. So this was my introduction to Geert Hofstede and his cultural dimensions. These are the sites which I used for this presentation. There are plenty of videos with Geert Hofstede on YouTube, so you can, if you are interested, you can watch him discussing each of the dimensions separately. Thank you. Dziękuję.